In the first couple of episodes, I pointed out that humans are increasingly seen as machines made of parts and systems. Looked at in this way, humans are made of parts that can be replaced and systems that can be repaired. And of course, that is happening already. As I said, I have several replacement parts in my body, and I know people who have many, many more than I do. True, some organs appear irreplaceable right now. But efforts are currently underway to either develop transplant techniques, artificial organs, or even to borrow organs from specially bred animals. The same approach is being taken with the systems that tie the whole thing together. Critical parts of the circulatory system in my body have been replaced, and others are under constant maintenance through medication. This is true of most people in the developed world over a certain age. We take, in no particular order, drugs that maintain the circulatory system, the nervous system, the lymphatic system, and the digestive system. That latter is a big seller of drugs right now. But what happens if the whole system fails? We can keep people alive a long time, much longer than ever before, by replacing parts and maintaining systems. But ultimately, we know it is written into our DNA, the very source of the continued functioning of our bodies, to die. Whatever theologians may say about how we were made, we didn't evolve to live forever. We evolved to eventually die. But we'd like to live forever, and we certainly try. And since, as I noted in episode 3, we believe that our self, our soul, is located primarily in the brain and specifically in the cerebral cortex, doesn't it make sense that we would seek immortality, or at least a longer life, by keeping the brain alive? There are 3 types of research efforts aimed at keeping brains alive, and they are currently underway in our world. One, the oldest and least refined method of keeping the brain alive, is basically freezing the brain of individuals until the technology develops with which they can be resuscitated. Brief pause here. It may be that this is what the Egyptians were doing when they mummified bodies. But we've got to say they mummified the wrong part of the body. They actually threw away the brain and they mummified the heart. They didn't quite understand where the self lived. Anyway, people are freezing their brains, hoping that they can be resuscitated. And this could happen, by the way. It has already been shown that even deprived of blood circulation for a few minutes, maybe even hours, brains can be filled with artificial blood, and the cells within the brain will continue to function. So who knows? Maybe if quickly and properly preserved, the brain could be resuscitated. Scientists are working on it right now. A second shot at immortality is finding a way to transplant the brain from one human whose body is fatally damaged into another human whose brain is fatally damaged. After all, isn't a brain transplant the logical step up from organ transplants, since the brain is just an organ? Again, scientists are actively working on brain transplants. And third, and this relates most closely to the rise of artificial intelligence, there is the possibility that the neural networks that are the basis for an AI could be created to allow the consciousness of a human to be transplanted from a biological brain to a silicone brain. Not a brain transplant, consciousness transplant. If we could map within a biological brain the exact connections between the neurons, then in theory, they could be recreated in an artificial neural network computer. And thus we would have not a brain transplant, but a consciousness transplant. It may be a self-consciousness transplant. Okay, that seems far-fetched. But so did heart transplants 80 years ago, and now they are commonplace. So instead of standing around drinking with the ghosts of the tomorrow that will never come, thank you, Madeleine Perot, we might step out into the world and face the tomorrow that will come, and what that means for our understanding of what it means to be human. And I'll add theologically, why should Christians balk at thinking of a transplantable self? a transplantable consciousness, a transplantable intelligence, a transplantable soul. Do we not believe with Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, we will not all sleep, but we will be changed in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet? For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. For the perishable body must clothe itself with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality. Or in 2 Corinthians 5, for we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. Meanwhile we groan, longing to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling. If we are more than the biological mechanism that sustains us now, why can't the self, the soul, be transplanted into a new body? That is a question we can no longer avoid. We can no longer put it off to the eschaton, which is what Paul had in mind. Because somewhere in a lab in California, somewhere in a hospital in Houston, new bodies are being prepared to receive the transplant of the human soul. And they aren't waiting for Jesus to come again. But think of what this means. In the world of science fiction, the Star Wars universe, for example, we regularly find that humans and other intelligent beings interact. So much so that robots are part of everyday life. Walking around the SMU campus, I see the beginning of that world. Little robots are all over campus delivering food. Quite cute. Intelligent? I'm not so sure about intelligent. Other robots deliver cash. We call them ATMs. They're not very mobile. There are robots to clean the floors. There are robots that cut lawns. And these are found in private homes, and they're being tested in public institutions. I've seen both at work. I have one. There are self-driving cars and trucks. So we're beginning to see human intelligence, our human intelligence, interacting with more and more forms of artificial intelligence in the real world. Did you know that robot pastors and worship leaders and counselors are already at work? And the same thing is happening in virtual worlds that exist purely in the software of a computer. Right now, avatars representing humans interact with avatars representing artificial intelligences in dozens of virtual game worlds. I've been there. I've been in those worlds. So have others. If you enter the world of Fortnite or Halo or other games like this, you may not be able to tell the real human players from the artificial intelligences represented by avatars. Here at SMU, researchers in the Guildhall are busily working on one or more, in fact, many more realistic virtual worlds, more and more lifelike avatars that represent human beings, and more human-like artificial intelligences to inhabit those virtual worlds with us. And don't forget that these ideas are well embedded in the popular consciousness. Do you remember the movie Tron? It was about a video game, a virtual world, into which a human consciousness is transported to compete with the master controller. What year was that? 1982. If we aren't thinking about what virtual realities, avatars, and the transportation of consciousness into the silicone brain, we are 40 years behind the culture. Remember War Games? It was more than 30 years ago. And the concept of the metaverse, using that very name, is now 30 years old. From a book called Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. And this already affects Christian ministry. There are already churches that exist entirely in a virtual world like Spatial or Meta. Avatars worshiping with avatars. And are they AIs created to fill out the congregation? How would you know? Does it matter? I've sat in those seminars, those virtual seminars in a virtual theater in a virtual world with some humans and some AIs. All of this is preparing us for a future in which human consciousness will be transplanted into either a neural network where it can and certainly will live out its possibly eternal life in a virtual world, or perhaps into an artificial body like the old $6 million Man television series, or less happily, Robocop. So we face a big question. What is human authenticity, and how do we ensure that we are authentic? We'll take that up in the next episode.